Hello and welcome to the Audio University podcast. This is our first episode in a while, and it's actually our very first episode that will be live streamed. So if you're in the chat, please let me know where you're tuning in from. I'm very excited about this episode. We've got special guest Glenn Rosenstein, and many of you will be familiar with his name, but if you're not familiar with his name, there's a really good chance that you'll be familiar with his work. He's worked with a variety of big, very popular names: U2, Madonna, Talking Heads, the Ramones, and on the list goes. And in addition to his music work, he's also done a lot of work in TV and film. He's done work with SNL. Let me bring him up here. And Glenn, please just give us a headline overview of who you are and what you do and some of the projects you've worked on over the years.
Yeah, man, great to join you today and great to be able to chat to you and your audience. My name, Glenn Rosenstein. I'm a producer and engineer, a mixer, a songwriter, a lot of different interests in music and elsewhere. And I was fortunate enough to come up in a time in the music business where you could get a job in a recording studio, and that studio, at least initially in your career, would launch you into great names. I started at Power Station in New York, which still exists now under the auspices of Berkeley, and worked for quite a while at Sigma for about 4 or 5 years, and then went off on my own as a mixer, and then became a record producer. And I did a couple of record labels and pretty immersed in the music business for quite some time. Still am.
That's one thing that really struck me as I was researching for talking with you, is just the variety of work that you've been involved in. I'm interested to hear just about the early stages of your journey. You were born in New York, raised in New York, and just tell us about before the Power Station. What does your story look like?
It was probably not dissimilar to a lot of other people who had an interest in music. One of the biggest hurdles was that the technology in those days was fairly exclusive, meaning you couldn't really do much in your home and be competitive on the pro level. You either had to work in a recording studio or have very wealthy parents who would go out and buy equipment that would be found in a recording studio. There were no digital audio workstations. There was very, very little in the way of accessible. So I started on guitar as a kid and found out very, very early on that I was not going to be a guitarist professionally. I didn't have, I had the brain for it, but I didn't have the chops for it.
Yeah.
And I was in, little local bands, and friends of mine who were probably as geeky as I was about recording, we all worked a couple of summers and chipped in together and bought what was available at that time, which for home use was a 4-track reel-to-reel recorder. And that's kind of how we got our start and how I got my start. This was in my high school years and early college years. And unbeknownst to me, I didn't know that it was producing music, but we were the ones in our neighborhood who had a 4-track recorder. So we'd meet all these other bands who wanted to avail themselves.
Word got around, huh?
Word got around, yeah. And none of them turned out to be, earth-shattering recordings, but there was an education process in all of that, especially in terms of learning how to deal with people, personalities, the whole arc of how music is created. And it was a great education. It really was. And I wound up going to City University in Brooklyn to college, and graduated with a communications degree. And I felt at the time, and my parents at the time felt, that it would be great, to have some kind of fallback if things didn't work out. But in between those moments, these buddies that I had mentioned and myself would get on a subway and go into Manhattan and hang out outside of professional recording studios. I don't know why we did that. I have no idea what compelled us, but I had a very passionate desire to see what happened on the inside. I mean, just being an enormous music fan, enjoying that process and wanting to know how was this actually done professionally, you know.
Let me
And
stop you right there because I think up until this point, when we move into the multi Grammy nominations and awards and all this, our stories might diverge a little bit, but up until this point, your story sounds a lot like my story and a lot of the people I know who are interested in this. You start as a musician, maybe you gravitate toward the technical side because you're trying to record your music,
yes,
right?
totally.
And you get an education in doing that. I mean, we've got people from Ghana, from Vancouver, from all around the United States. I'm curious to hear people watching. Does this sound familiar to you as well? Is this a familiar story?
Well, I think that passion is not generational. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
The equipment is there, that changes, but the narrative itself, I think it's to me, it goes across age, it goes across culture, it goes across, you love music or you love art or you love whatever sports or whatever it is that you're really driven by. You find ways of fitting yourself into that narrative. And that includes maybe investing, if you're into music, a Pro Tools rig or
yeah,
getting Logic on your computer or whatever. If you're into, the sport thing, you're doing pickup basketball games at your high school. But that passion is always there. That passion is driving. And then you find out whether or not you have the talent
hmm.
to be able to make the transition from hobbyist to professional.
And that's where you were. You were at that crossroads when your parents were like, "All right, well, maybe we should, have a plan B, right? Go to school for communications." At
Mhm.
that stage, had you already had in mind, all right, that is plan B. Plan A is
Yeah,
to,
absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
what was your plan A at that time?
I mean, my plan A was to get a gig at a professional recording studio in Manhattan. And thankfully, proximity was not an issue. I lived in New York City. It was just the competitive nature of the business, which was a different kind of competitive nature than there is now. Now people are opting for attention and need to do that through their own personal marketing techniques in social media, and all that kind of stuff. For me, I just had to get a gig. I just had to get a job. And in spite of how much I knew, by the way, the schools were not prevalent in those days. Berkeley existed, but there was no recording, or if there was, I was not. I didn't have the grades to avail that, and there were not, all these studios that then became schools. I mean, those studios in Manhattan were doing record work full time, jingle work full time, film, and television music full time.
Yeah,
And while it sounds like there was a real need, it was a handful of people that got through that barrier. And that was my first goal, was not necessarily to be, I mean, I had aspirations of being a producer, certainly had aspirations of being an engineer, but the first obstacle was to get just through the door. And
yeah.
it was not an easy thing to do.
And how did you do it?
I got a Manhattan Yellow Pages and I turned to a recording studio and I cold called every studio in New York
That's a
and
lot of studios.
a lot of
That's a
studios,
lot of studios.
phone
Yeah.
calls. And there was a studio manager at Power Station who at the time her name was Lords Keene and she married actually Mark Knopfler and divorced Mark Knopfler as well. So she's gone through a number of last name changes. But long story short, we're still very good friends and we're still in tight communication. But she gave me my break. I cold called the studio and engaged her in a conversation, which that alone was amazing to have been able to get through the receptionist and get through to her and for her to listen. But the upshot of it was, look, Glenn, you sound like a nice guy and we'd love to, consider you, but things are slow right now. And I don't know why, but some intuition in my brain went, well, if they're slow, now's the perfect time because it's not always going to be slow. And then you'll have somebody who's perfectly trained.
Hmm.
So the call got a little bit quiet. And in about a minute or so, she's like, come in on Monday. Now, I didn't go in as a recording engineer or even as an assistant or a gopher or whatever. I was the weekend night receptionist, but it created the best stories because I saw all of the debauchery firsthand. So that
Yeah.
was, yeah.
Well, and I think that that's a really important thing for young engineers and young musicians, young people in general
Uh-huh.
tend to feel like in order for them to get an opportunity, they have to know everything right off the bat, and they
No,
have to prove that they know everything. But actually, that can be a little bit counterproductive, can't it? Right.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you
And
showing that awareness that you had more to learn, I think.
well,
I
I
think
couldn't, if I was walking into an environment where when you think about like the names of the artists that worked at Power Station and Hit Factory and Record Plant, again, the contemporary studios of that time, there's no smoke and mirrors there. There really is not. You had to really know your shit. And I did not know my shit. But I was very, very fortunate. There were a handful of engineers who were full time staff engineers at Power Station and at Sigma. And they treated me really, really kindly. They basically said, shut the fuck up and watch what we do and make yourself as, transparent as humanly possible, which was not necessarily easy for me. And learn, learn. And what I learned was not only the technical aspect of everything, but very, very important. It was the interpersonal relations, understanding politically, creatively, what goes where, what piece fits into which puzzle. And that's a difficult thing. And it's an even more difficult thing, I think, to learn now because the opportunities for that kind of interaction really have become less and less. And now it's governed, which I'm not saying it's worse. I love social media. I love how music is marketed these days. I love contemporary music these days. But the challenge is remarkably different. And the opportunity to learn what this is, the communication skills, the knowing when to volunteer and when to kind of keep quiet, the relationship that you have to have with your superiors, with the receptionists, with, like all of it, the entire landscape. That's a process. And it's not as available as it once was. And that's kind of too bad in a way. But there's plenty of great producers, songwriters, musicians from all ages that I still interact with. And that process still, people find their way, man. If you're really excellent at what you do, you'll find your way.
that's the second time you've brought up this interpersonal thing, right? In high school, you said it was a learning experience, and I was expecting you to say, yeah, we learned to do a lot of troubleshooting, and we learned how to, do these certain technical techniques. And you probably did to some degree, but the thing you
Uh,
pointed out to me was the interpersonal stuff, even there.
yeah, I hear you. And man, I mean, this is just my opinion today. If
Yeah,
we talk a week from today, I'll give you a completely different thought process on it. But everything that I've experienced, and this is not sage advice, by the way. This is just one guy's kind of journey. Really, we're interacting with people all the time, aren't we? No matter what we're doing, we're always interacting with people. And I've seen engineers become remarkably successful, and they may not be the best. They'll be that 108% instead of 110%, let's say. Okay. But their ability to communicate and to interact with everybody, it's the hang. A
yeah,
lot of it really is the hang. And it's no different than your circle of friends and the people you enjoy spending time with. If and you either have that, you can't make yourself be a different person, but you either have that or you don't have that. So processes to me are very, very important. And, whether I'm a producer hiring a room full casting, an album, I have a solo artist and I have to figure out who I think is going to be the best set of people for her project. who's going to really get along creatively well, but also, you know,
Yeah.
this and this part as well, the hard
Yeah.
part.
We actually have a really, I think, well articulated comment here from El Mission. Says politics is a superpower in the music industry. Glenn is 100% on that. It's a
Wow,
small scene, ultimately, and you have to be cool to everyone you can.
I agree.
Right? I think that when I walk around events like AES, I
Mhm.
think that becomes really apparent because there are so many people there. I mean, look at you right here on here with us in my audience. You're not here. I'm not paying you. There's nothing actually that you're receiving other than being able to help people. And I
Yeah,
think when you go to AES, there's a audio engineering society is what AES is. By the way, if you're unfamiliar, those listening, you go there and there's a general feeling of community. And I've always had this theory that that's partly because the natural selection that you're talking about. The people who make it aren't only the people with the technical skills. It's the people that are filtered through, the can they hang, as you put it,
yeah.
filter.
I mean, I think I know you're confirming, my thoughts on it, but your thoughts as well. It's pretty spot on. I also think, look, there's human beings are going to act like human beings regardless of what they're doing. They could be a sales guy, in a store selling shoes or whatever, and there's going to be these wonderful moments and awful moments. But then when it's driven by passion as well, because theoretically we're all wanting to experience those, goosebump moments in a
Mm.
recording studio when somebody does a great performance or programs a great track, and I never would have thought of that. But there's certainly jealousy, and there's certainly a competitive nature to who we all are. And you see somebody else, and you say to yourself, "Man, why am I not there?" You know. So I see. I guess my point is that at an AES show, for example, I don't feel this stuff because, and again, none of this is arrogance. I just don't feel competitive with anybody. I,
Mm.
I feel a sense that if somebody wants to work with me, whether I'm at a high level or a low level, they're wanting to work with me because they're feeling like I'm going to bring something unique to the game. If they didn't want to work with me, I couldn't convince them to do so, you know?
Yep.
So I'm pretty secure with that kind of stuff. And even at the start, I was secure about that. It isn't, okay, I've created some opportunities for some larger releases or whatever. None of that shit matters to me. It's, whether or not you can do a great job or not do a great job, be a great hang or not be a great hang. I think the point I'm trying to make is it's very, very normal stuff. It really is normal stuff. I think that where the differentiators come in are, do do I make the right decisions? Do I hang too long in a situation that's not bearing fruit, right? You're working you're doing podcasts, and your podcasts are very successful, but that if you did not have that kind of success and people were not showing up after a certain period of time, you would want to move on, maybe to a related field, maybe not to exactly the same thing. And knowing that, I mean, for me, that was guitar. I still play, I can play on records, but I would never hire me as a guitarist ever in a million years. And kind of understanding, I guess that's my point, kind of understanding where your limits are and also where your strengths are, kind of help you guide so you don't waste time.
Yeah, it was a hard pill to swallow for me when I finally realized it wasn't the mixing skills or the recording skills that were holding me back. It was the sound coming out of my guitar amp.
Well,
It
yeah,
was the lack of musicianship. And when you get somebody who has doubled down on their strengths and then you double down on your own strengths, I think
right.
that is a magical combination. I'm curious to hear. So you say, passion hasn't changed over
No.
the years. Your story sounds very similar to mine, and I'm sure it's very similar to many of those watching right now and listening.
Mhm.
The interpersonal and the human nature of it all, that hasn't changed either. But technically, things have changed quite a
Mhm.
lot.
Sure.
So, like how has the recording workflow changed from your first sessions to your mid-career to now?
I think it's changed primarily in two ways. I mean, the technology and access to technology has really remarkably changed everything. And again, I don't have to. Your audience knows this already. I started out on a 4-track recorder, which became an 8-track recorder, which became a 16, a 24. Then two machines synced together in a 48, and then it went to digital recording on tape, and then digital recording, in a box, and then after that, a digital audio workstation. And each one of these things created challenges and opportunities. The nuance to retry and redo and go after stuff, flying things around, taking people who may have had great creative ideas, but not had the skills or the chops to actually play that kind of thing live. It was a huge benefit to them as time progressed because all of a sudden they could have a seat at the table. So they became programmers, and they, started using in the early days MIDI sequencers and all of that. And, what we were just talking about before, knowing limitations, right? So all of a sudden they became competitive. And this was really, really cool. I have a natural bent toward that kind of curiosity. And I've made friends not only in the music industry, but in the music technology industry. So I've done stuff with product dev guys over at Avid and a lot of different manufacturers, and that kept me knowledgeable. And that engagement created opportunities because myself and a couple of my friends who love doing this kind of stuff, no compensation, just, hey, here's a tool and we can have some influence on how that tool works for better or for worse. It kept me having to stay in form, in and that was the education process on the tech side that kept me competitive, if that's what we're talking about. On the music creation tip, though, partnership is something that I really would stress, learning, not being in a vacuum, being comfortable. I mean, I know maybe this is the third time I'm saying this,
Right.
but that process, is what I love. I love the process. I like the drive more than the destination, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, Once the record is done, or the film is done, or whatever it is, it's done and you move on. And I like that. And I guess what I'm suggesting is, if you have that as one of the skill sets that you have in your toolbox, that's going to bode you well because you like the process. You like being in a band. You like being in a room full of creatives. You like having that give and take. I kind of call it a seat at the table. Man, I love having a seat at the table. And that's a real driver for me. Again, I don't know if I if I answered your question, but that's kind of what drives me.
Well, and I think you're right. I think everybody already knows that technology has developed over time, and I think that that has opened some doors for doing things differently, and that could be positive. I remember when I was talking to you a few weeks ago, you had mentioned this idea of the golden age of recording, or the golden age of audio.
Mhm.
And before we get to why you feel that is the case, I just want to bring up something else you said earlier in this conversation, which is that human element. I think because things are so democratized, people can go to Guitar Center and get an audio interface and a microphone and make their own music in their house. Maybe word doesn't get around that you have an audio interface because so does every other musician in your town, right? And so it almost takes away those opportunities to hone your interpersonal skills and to build your network that may someday lead to partnerships.
Mhm.
So what's your perspective on that?
I,
Do you?
I don't know that I have a very specific. I mean, it's a great observation, and I completely agree. We're talking about a whole bunch of things, but all of those things are so interrelated with each other. I don't want to make the same point again, but it's really, really true. We sit down at a table with people as strangers, and where we connect and why we connect with those people, and how that actually becomes um, how it actually creates opportunity. You know, tons of psychologists study that kind of thing all the time. You and I live this. We live this every day, and we try to figure out, and without an agenda, because it wants to be authentic, right? I mean, you want people to not be thinking, oh, he's sitting there trying to figure me out, but just the way that we kind of process information. And in the case specifically of music and music technology, using those tools to help further the language of music. I mean, again, clearly I find it fascinating, and I'm not a young guy anymore. Obviously I'm not a young guy, but I still feel a lot of very positive energy from those kinds of interactions, regardless of the age of the person or the experience of the person. You know, don't see myself, and again, I'm kind of meandering off topic a little bit, but I don't see myself as a teacher. I see myself as a partner. Now, that doesn't mean in the partnership that I'm not getting taught. And again, doesn't matter if you're new to the game, old to the game, young, old, whatever. But it's that sharing, it's that constant sharing. And clearly, look, some of those relationships are defined by business, by contract, by attorneys and all that other bullshit. But, first and foremost, it is music is communication. And, I don't think that there's any wisdom beyond that. I mean, to me, as I've grown into the business and done this, I don't even want to tell you how many years I've been making records. I've been making records so long, I still call them records. But that connectivity is a real. It's what drives it's what drives me, and it's what drives everybody. I think maybe.
Well, I think I want to hope that that's true, but I can tell you that I've only talked to you a few times, right? And I just feel the curiosity and the optimism that you bring to the table, and it's magnetic, and I can understand it, how that could be conducive to creativity,
Right.
I am curious to hear, though, the golden age of recording, or what did you say, the golden age of audio? Explain
Well,
that to me. What do you mean by that?
having lived through the late 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, etc., I have never experienced a time when the communication about audio and the comparative nature, whether it's hardware, software, uh, people are going to argue about digital audio workstations. But the fact is that there is such an enormous amount of recording equipment, hardware and software. It was never like that when we were younger. There was maybe two handfuls. There were Pultecs and 1176s and LA2As, and maybe four or five manufacturers. That you look at all these boutique products that are coming out, and they're freaking good, for the most part. They're really, really good. Most of the plugins that I use, they're really, really good. This is a remarkable, in my mind, this is a remarkable moment, whether you're a hobbyist or you're a professional, to be able to be plying your trade. Look at what you have to choose from, you know? And I mean, we may not argue, but we may disagree, but I am optimistic because it is a remarkable moment. You can do whatever you want to do, and you really are only limited by your talent.
I agree with you on that front for
Yeah.
sure. That the ability for somebody in high school to get their first recording system, it's
Mm.
so much easier than it was for you and your friends to work really hard and then buy that 4-track machine, right?
Which was not a professional machine either. So we were not getting the results that maybe we had the ability to get, but the gear was subpar, relatively speaking. It was
Yeah.
subpar. Yeah.
Even entry level these days is
Oh, yeah.
so
Yes.
good. Yeah, so good.
So
Uh,
again, and I'm not making a proclamation and, oh, it's the golden age of
yeah,
recording
yeah,
because I say so, but I think it's maybe it's the golden age of opportunity.
yeah.
because you can immerse yourself as much as you care to, and you can accept as much information as you care to. You could deny as much information as you care to, but that opportunity really is there,
Yeah.
and it becomes, hey, you know what? Can you take all of these tools and can you make something that resonates with enough people that you can generate some kind of income out of it?
I think that it's a very nuanced discussion. Is today the golden age? I'm looking in the comments and I see a few comments about loudness wars. How could it be, the golden age if we've got really small dynamic range and things? But my thought would be that actually the gear isn't what makes that happen. In reality, you have the opportunity to make music in as many different forms and with as many different loudness stats as you want. I
Right.
think that's a different discussion altogether why people do that.
I mean, that's a very, very, to me, no offense to anybody who's going to post anything. Anything I offer up is an opinion. You know what I mean? It's not, as I said earlier, if you were listening, it's not a declaration. It's just an opinion, and it's an opinion based on my experience. The second thing is that who gives a shit about this kind of stuff? Who cares really about loudness wars? It's just more, it's more noise. If you don't like the way a record sounds, go out and make a better record.
Yeah.
Nobody's telling you that you have to compress or limit the shit. You don't have to do that. If you don't like it, then change the way you work or make the work that you do represent that. And if you're really good at what you do, people will have an ear for you. I see people argue about analog versus digital, about multi-track recording at what level. I'm talking about analog now, whether it's 370 nanowebars per meter. Let's have an argument about that versus 250 nanowebars per meter, or tape formulations, or what. Great song, great performance, talented producer, talented engineer, great guitarist, amazing programmer. You know, that to me is what really, really matters. We can take all the time to argue the points about anything, but at the end of the day, the transaction to me looks like capturing greatness. You know,
Yeah.
you're a filmmaker, you want to use real film versus, video, whatever gets you there, man, that's fine. But to me, that's a waste of time, a little bit.
And it's a common theme in this conversation, Glenn, because again, in high school, you didn't focus on the technical things that you learned. You thought about the human things that you learned. And I think that carries on to even this point in our conversation. We got another comment that says the golden age was reached in the 60s. And I think a lot of people say it was reached in the 70s. And, I think I'm curious to hear what are some barriers to entry today that you faced in your early days of your career that just simply do not exist today. We've already talked about the gear and how you can go get an audio interface that will give you really high
Well, I'd
quality.
go the other way. I would say, what I think are the problems. I mean, you're asking, so what are the problems, the barriers to entry right now? And to me, the biggest problem is that there is not a lot of curation. There's just so much material available, social media, across whatever it might be, YouTube, Instagram, however people are getting stuff out, they have the opportunity to create potentially a large audience, but most of it kind of falls by the wayside. There's far, far more supply than there is demand. So that I feel bad for my contemporaries who are way, way younger than I am, and they're just kind of starting out. The other thing I think I mentioned earlier, or maybe this was before we got started, with the podcast, was I was hired in a recording studio where I ultimately was a staff engineer, and these were multi-room facilities. So I would be working on a record in one room, and in the other room there would be a different artist, and that artist, she may walk by my studio, overhear some of the work I'm working on, and go, I want to work with that guy for the next, for their next record. The hiring potential was a lot different. Most people today, professional level or otherwise, are working in a vacuum, and they're working in the vacuum of their home or on the vacuum of their laptop. And the curation that gets them in front of professionals, if that's what their goal is, very difficult. Very. It was always really hard, like really hard, super competitive. I think it's much harder now. I think that the recording process, the technology, I wouldn't say it's easier, it's just more accessible. But accessibility to tastemakers and gatekeepers in the professional side of the music business, I think it's fractional in comparison to what it used to be.
Very interesting take.
Yeah.
I think that there is the distribution potential for people to find niches. For
Sure.
every niche that exists, I think there's an audience that can now be reached. Whereas
Absolutely.
before, maybe we had 6 different labels that,
Right.
and each one of those might have a niche that varies slightly from the other. Now, I think labels still do play a large role, but there are avenues such as
Yeah.
YouTube,
Oh,
such as Spotify
absolutely.
to publish. I think though that there is that limitation of supply, and just there's so much supply.
The major labels are not, in my mind, are not really a player anymore. They only finance the things that are already large. I don't hate labels, by the way. I love
Yeah,
everybody. You know what I
yeah,
mean? But they're not involved anymore. From where I sit, they're not involved anymore in artist development. That just doesn't exist anymore. And it's become the domain of the artists themselves. The expectation is the artist not only has to write or create, however that actually happens, a band or a group of people or a small entity, but they have to get it out onto social media in a very effective way, competitive with everything else that's out there. And their numbers have to register on the major labels' dashboards to be able to go, wait a second, man, something's breaking out here. Something's actually happening. But the competition, I mean, I could take a photograph of, my cat's paw, I'm not a photograph, a video, of my cat licking her paw. And that is the competition
yeah,
to your great music, the great thing, there's just so much out there.
yeah.
And the cost for the non-pro, let's say, very talented, but not quite there yet, for the marketing that needs to go to get you to happen to get that needle out of that haystack is prohibitive. You know, it's not easy to do. And then, durability, whether or not an artist can maintain. There's just the challenges, as we were talking about before. They're remarkably different. I know what they are. I mean, I have an entertainment company, and that entertainment company actually is a part of Meta. And, it's interesting to see what techniques are being used, how people are navigating that. But again, my sympathy, I don't know, my heart lies with new artists, because I do believe you don't have the restrictions that you had when I was coming up, but you don't have the focus once you get past a certain hurdle. In my opinion, it's just much harder to create a career for yourself now. That's, that's just what I think.
I think it's really interesting what you brought up about the range of content that people are watching on YouTube. It's not just a music app, right? I
Oh,
mean, for me, I think one of the most helpful things I ever learned, as it pertains to my channel, and how I've grown my reach, has been how do I provide value to people. And in education, that's very clear cut. I get up and I talk about a topic that people are wanting to know more about. Um, of course, with music, it's a little bit more challenging because I think for so long, the value that comes from music was the music itself. and now you're trying to get traffic, or at least just impressions, in a sea of educators, of entertainers, of musicians, of cute cat videos.
Right.
And I think that what rises to the top is what people find valuable. But
Mhm.
there are sometimes, I love the ingenuity that a lot of musicians are having. I don't actually, I kind of reject the idea when people say, I put my music out there and nothing happens.
Right.
Well, maybe you need to do more than just the music. If you can't hire somebody to do the marketing, figure out how to market your music to get impressions. But at the extreme of that, sometimes the music takes a second seat to almost like a gimmick, you know, and sometimes those gimmicks get the attention when maybe some better music for that viewer exists, buried beneath all
No,
of those
I
other
agree.
things,
I mean, the challenges clearly, and by the way, we're not going negative here. Those challenges are surmountable because people are making great music and people are hearing great music. But those challenges, again, to your earlier point, have changed. What once was the cost of the van to get the 70s band from venue to venue is now the cost of marketing. Marketing is the van now, you know? And there's an unfairness to that in a way, right? Because there was a band that could afford a van versus the band that couldn't afford the van. And now there's a band or an artist who's, whether it's a parent or friends or they work really, really hard and they're capable, of the burden of media costs and what that actually might look like to be competitive. I mean, the good news there is that you get a pretty quick indication of whether or not your product is going to fly. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? It's not a 2 or 3 or a 4 year. It's maybe a month, 2 months, 3 months, and if you don't see stickiness, okay, well, so much for that. I better put out a different video or new song or whatever, or a lyric video or whatever might bolster that. But
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, YouTube alone gives me such robust analytics over
yeah,
what's working and what's not. If I were a musician, I would have that data today. Whereas if I were a musician buying the van and driving on my Midwest tour, my only feedback was there were 3 people at the show
right,
and they either left early or they didn't.
yeah,
So I think that you're right. Like the power that we have is there. I think it's just a different skill set, I believe,
yeah.
being a musician and being a marketing expert.
Sure. And look, not every artist embodies, let's call it, for grins, because we like making this shit up. But not every artist embodies the 6 things. Let's call it 6 things. So you got to be a songwriter, got to record your music. It's not going to add up to 6, by the way. So, you know, you've got to figure out a marketing strategy. You have to be expert. That's my point, at a bunch of
Yeah.
different things, and hopefully, like in the old days, you had friends who were roadies who would haul all your gear around. Well, now you have friends who are marketing experts because they know the lay of the land and they're capable of helping you. But the requirement of an artist is much, much deeper these days than it used to be. And in my conversations with the people who do run the major labels, they shake their head from side to side and go, wow, it's much, much harder now for these kids, forgive the word kids, than it was back in the day. But yet they're still the ones pulling the strings and they have to answer to their stockholders and they have to show profit on a year in year basis. And the system continues, the system kind of continues to roll. But the requirement to being a serious artist these days, in my opinion, requires a larger dedication to time, logistics, and finance. Not the same as it was. You could just be a musician and hang and, like I said,
Yeah.
drive from town to town in your van and yeah, man, I'm here to play. Not not anymore. Or you better have a really good team around you if that's how you want to live your life. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. I think it's a curse and an opportunity though, because if you were just a musician back then and the people with the marketing means saw you and said, there's no market for this.
Right.
Then that was the end of the story.
Was it? Yes.
But
Right.
now I think the algorithms serve us in a way,
Yeah.
but you still have to wear that hat now, and I think that's a great point.
But
I
you
want
think,
to go ahead.
I'm sorry, go. I was just going to say, you think about the challenges to your podcast and how competitive that world actually is. You put together something really great. People seek you out. They want the information. They like the way the information is presented. They like who you are as a host. And yet you still know that behind the scenes, there's that 6 or 10 or 20 things that have to happen to keep you in the game. And you either become expert at it and you thrive, or you become a record producer.
I'm curious.
Excuse me.
I think a similar topic here, and maybe this is a segue, would be when you look at today's landscape.
Mm-hmm.
We've got this new way to market things, and that's the way to market your end product. But in the early days of your development, you've also got YouTube, which can be that education.
Sure.
Right. And when you were an intern, or let's even go back before that, when you got your first tape machine with your friends, how did you learn things? And then you got your internship, and what did learning look like there? And now we fast forward to today, where all of that information is probably out there somewhere if you have the right search term to find it. But there's a lot of information that is true and a lot of information that might be misleading. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, with so much information out there, how do young engineers and musicians separate what's valuable from the noise?
I genuinely don't know.
Right. Okay.
No, but and I'm happy to give you, of course, I'm happy to give you thoughts on it. In the early days, where all there was the library, there was no material whatsoever about recording, and about the process and all of that kind of stuff. It just, so we kind of, invent, not in a heroic way. Excuse me. We invented it ourselves by making loads of mistakes, and that was the education process. We tried all kinds of things, and 90% of those things were wrong, and the 10% of the things that were right, we would kind of pull in as part of our routine, et cetera, et cetera. Now what you have on YouTube, amazing, man. There's a lot of really great information out there, and a lot of bullshit. But again, that's life, right? I mean, you just accept. But for the student, again, is it a golden age, if we want to use that phrase? Yeah, kind of is, because you're the kind of expertise that I needed for guidance in my career came at a really, really high cost. I had to get a job in a recording studio, and to meet a Bob Clearmountain, Neil Dorfman, the other people who guided the early stages of my career. That's not an easy thing to do in comparison to turning on YouTube, doing a quick search and going, show me how to get that drum sound, or show me how to work. I get gear all the time, and I don't read the instruction manual. I just go onto YouTube, do a search, and watch somebody demonstrate exactly how it's used. That's great.
I think there is maybe something to be said for, there are different types of learning. And just because YouTube has one of those types covered, the kinds of things that I can offer in my channel, there's another type, and it's experiential. And just because you can shortcut through some of those learned lessons, and learn what not to do on a YouTube video and then never do it, there might have been something valuable in not watching that YouTube video and actually making the mistake, right? And then learning it the hard way.
Yeah. And again, I don't think, I know this sounds so bullshit philosophical, but it's never an either or, is it?
No.
It's never an either or. If you're dedicated and devoted and do have the passion for creation, whatever that creation looks like, it's never a single path, man. I mean, you're wanting to create these parallel paths that at some point you hope they intersect, and that intersection looks like whatever your definition of success might be, right? Whether it's creating a great song or getting paid for your work or whatever. But it's not an either or. Man, if the tools are out there, then avail yourself of those tools. The caveat is not one is better than the other. The caveat is not wasting time and spending the necessary time to do the research. And you become the filter. You're out there and you're listening to stuff. This is valuable because I took this idea, whatever that might be, a technical idea, creative idea. I brought it into my narrative, and it actually yielded something great that I wouldn't have thought of on my own. But the other 200 videos that I watched at YouTube were a complete waste of time. Well, just focus on the things that, as best you can, focus on the things that actually create opportunity for greatness,
Yeah. I mean, there are so many ways to do anything in audio.
Yeah.
One thing that this reminds me of when I went from studying 4 years at an audio school, and we had some experiential lab classes, and we'd do events for, I got some hands-on experience, a lot of it, but a lot of it was also theory. And then I went into my first internship in live sound. And I remember those people, none of them had gone to school for audio, and they all had this idea that I wasted all my time going to audio school and that it's all about hands-on stuff. And today, fast forward to today, I think it is both. Like sort of what you're saying. I think that what those mentors taught me, I get chills thinking about it right now.
Wow.
What those mentors taught me, it changed the way I thought about things. But at the same time, I don't think they were right that I wasted my time learning the theory.
No.
So I think what I would encourage people to do today is, if you can't go to school for audio, that's fine, because we have YouTube. Like, learn on YouTube. But instead of searching things like how to EQ a vocal,
Mm-hmm.
or how to X, Y, you know what I mean? How to do something specifically, I would encourage people to learn how things work from the theoretical angle, and then go apply it from the hands-on angle. And I think those things would really work together. That's why I was telling you about my membership, where I've got people who come and they teach, and these people have, decades of experience recording and teaching. But it's not just that they teach things, it's that we are able to look at people's work and give them feedback on that. Because I would guess that having Bob Clearmountain, in the same room with you learned more than you could have in a YouTube video. Right.
Probably so. And again, not to belabor the point, I learned equally as much from a newbie, because a newbie's perspective isn't necessarily the tried and true way. And, she might come in, to a recording studio not having nearly the experience that I have, or work at, here at my place. And I'd be like, I never do it this way. And it's better.
Yeah. I love that about you, Glenn. I was listening to the podcast on Recording Studio Rock Stars with Lidge Shaw that you did. And it was amazing, because it's exactly what you're saying here. I think it's unique, and I hope that people can maybe take some of that characteristic of being open-minded from you. Because at the beginning of the show, Lidge said that, Glenn is a mentor of mine, and that's probably true. And then you said, hey, actually, let me first say that I might be a mentor of yours in some way, but Lidge, you're a mentor of mine in some ways too. So what's an example of something that stood out to you, how a young engineer did something that surprised you and it made you think, oh, maybe I don't know everything?
I wish I had an earth shaker for you.
Yeah.
But it happens all the time, because our creative processes, when I say our, I mean yours, mine, everybody who may or may not be listening, those are miracles to me, man. I hope I don't sound goofy here, but they really are miracles. We may put on a game face and we sit there and we're very, very calm and very, very cool about it. And we certainly have well-managed expectations of how something should or shouldn't turn out. But I hear some kind of miracle, and I have to call it that every day, a surprise, something that I would not have anticipated. Maybe more often from people who are longer professionals because they get what needs to be done. But I say almost as equally often, as much as I've loved working with artists who are recognizable names, I get as much joy and as much pleasure out of working with somebody who's working on their first album, because I know going in that there's a shit ton of things that they're not either gonna do what is the right way, or they're gonna bring a fresh perspective. So there's no one. There's never been, like, I don't have a favorite record I
Yeah.
worked on, or and that's not at you, by the way. But I don't have that kind of stuff, and it's I just, again, having a seat at the table, to me, being relevant to me, is the most important thing. And all of the other stuff, arguing about a microphone or arguing about, whatever was, I'm not taking a shot, by the way, at anybody who was, discussing in the little side chat about loudness wars. I don't care about that shit. I don't, you know. I just want to work with somebody I can learn from, and who I can impart what they consider to be some value to elevate their careers. That's really the bottom line for me.
You're clearly a very human centric person. You've talked about the miracles of people and how they contribute to the process, and how pivotal your interpersonal skills have been. But you also have thoughts after talking to you the first time about AI. And I'm curious to know, do you think that, is AI something we should be afraid of? Does it present opportunities? Does it have the capacity to be miraculous in of its own, in the way a human would?
Oh, it's not sentient yet, but yet is the operative word. And as usual, I sit on both sides of the fence. I see it as a potential collaborator, much as if you and I went into a room together and were working on or writing a song, and you brought to the game your experiences, your knowledge, your point of view, and I brought mine, and we came up with something that was different than something that I would have done on my own as a writer. But the problem with AI is not singular in terms of the music industry. There's an economic component to it that is going to be very, very interesting to see over the next couple of years, because it replaces PR people. It could potentially replace school teachers, attorneys. There's all of these things that people are already using AI for. And I've seen some things that are not available yet to the general public. The Suno of the world, and the Hedra of the world are really tip of the iceberg kind of stuff. This to me is like really like Gutenberg Bible-esque. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, a
industrial.
pivotal revolutionary point.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't have the capacity intellectually to be able to make any kind of prediction. I would suggest to you that it's worrisome.
Hmm.
Worrisome.
The curious side of me that I think you and I share, I'm
Hmm.
interested in it, and I want to know more about it, and I
Sure.
want to
Sure.
discuss the
Yeah.
opportunities that exist there. But at the same time, knowing how, I mean, I don't know how AI works. Let's be clear, but
Right.
knowing what I know about how it works, it seems that it takes things that have existed in the past, and it outputs some version of that, you know. Which actually, the more and more I learn about AI, the more and more I start to see that maybe that's how our own brains work. I'm curious to hear, do you think that humans will continue to value human hands in music, or is that
Yeah,
economically not going to be the way it works out?
again, my lack of intellect in this area specifically guides whatever I'm going to tell you. Again, not an either or. What we're looking at is percentages, right? So, I don't think that people could have predicted the impact of social media before social media became as pervasive as it is. And it changed the course of politics in our country. It changed, the course of education. It really fundamentally changed society. And I think that AI absolutely has the potential. Now, the question is, economically, how is that going to change things? Well, it's going to replace a whole bunch of jobs that are no longer relevant. And what are those people going to do for a living? But it's also potentially going to create opportunities that didn't exist before that we have yet to define. Do I know enough personally to be able to tell you if it's a 1-for-1 ratio, or for what every 100 jobs there's going to be one new job? I'm not a politician. I don't know that.
Yeah.
I would suggest, though, that if we look at social media and the changes in our society that have happened in the last 10 or 15 years, and what our world was like 20 years prior or 30 years prior, I do think it's going to have a similar impact.
Hmm.
I know none of these very, very large companies would invest the kind of R&D money, billions and billions of dollars.
Unprecedented amounts. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They wouldn't do it. You know, they don't necessarily invest because it's not their work or it's not their center of influence. If they invested that kind of money into cancer cure, there might be a cancer cure, you know. And again, no politics, no
Yeah.
whatever. But it's interesting to see from my perspective, um, historically, what this is kind of shaping up to be. So when it comes to music creation, again, that's a that's like tiny in comparison to
Hmm.
what the implications of an AI driven society are actually going to look like.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I'd be concerned. I'd
Yeah.
be
And I appreciate the fact that you say you don't know, because I think no one does at this
Yeah.
stage. I am the curious part of me, the more optimistic side, when it comes to AI. I had mentioned that my understanding is that an AI is going to take things that exist and output something with what exists, what it's been trained on. Um, that reminds me of some work you've done with like IK Multimedia, where we're talking about Fame Studios, right?
Sure.
Will you give people just a brief, one liner of what I'm talking about here?
Well, just Fame Studios is a easily called one of the more historic studios down in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, and it was the start of what was called a Muscle Shoals sound. So Aretha Franklin and Wilson Pickett and just all of these founders and formers of a certain type of music came from there. I'm a partner in that studio that started in 2019, and that I did because I love music and I wanted to see that studio thrive. Um, we have partnered with a number of companies, TuneTrack being one, IK Multimedia being another, to give the opportunity to people who don't necessarily have the wherewithal or the desire to make a trip down to Northwest Alabama, and created through their technology, not through ours, uh, these plugins and sample packs that give a sense of what working down there would be like.
And I
And
think that's what is related to the AI for me. I know that the tool that you
right,
made wasn't particularly AI, right?
right.
But I think that AI opens up opportunities to allow us to integrate these nostalgic sounds that have existed in the past, right? So, and get put certain studios and certain pieces of hardware in people's hands,
Sure.
that without having to be there in person.
Yeah.
That's something that's always fascinated me. I think I did a video on what is the analog sound, right, which is
Mm.
quite the undertaking.
Wow.
But what I learned in doing that video was that, is it better or is it worse? I don't think that's the right question. I think so much of music is, what does it make you feel? And I think that the reason, or one of the reasons maybe, that music makes you feel anything is because it takes you back to an emotion you felt when hearing that for the first time.
Sure.
So like this distortion that occurs on like a Sam Cooke album, right?
Right. Right.
Uh, that is unique. And is it better? Well, on a technical fidelity standpoint, right, it's not better. But would you prefer to have just a completely clean digital recording? Not in all situations,
Right.
because you feel something and you remember something when that happens. And I think it's interesting to think about how maybe AI, and even just plugins that exist today, how
Hmm.
they're able to give us access to those things. Give me the sound of, you know,
Sure. Sure.
of this Muscle Shoals recording,
Yeah.
or take these tracks and make them sound like they were played by the band at Muscle Shoals,
I think, I mean, again, without really understanding, I understand what you're saying, but
Yeah.
without understanding the implications,
Yeah.
it's also fun. Like
Yeah.
fun is still,
It is.
fun
Yeah.
is still fun. And if you're a fan of music that was created in Muscle Shoals and you feel like on a certain level, I mean, it's not the same as actually making a record in Muscle Shoals at Fame Studios. Right. We get that. We understand that. But this could actually be some fun. And
Yeah.
that's what we tried. And certainly we were not driving that bus. I mean, IK Multimedia, in the case of that plugin, their technique, their technical expertise certainly drove that. But we sat with them and told them what we would like it to look like, what we would like it to sound like, and how much fun can we build into this? Can we make it so people could use the individual consoles, that the hand built console that was made in 1962? This is stuff that most people wouldn't even see in a museum, and we want people to have like fun doing this. So, and yeah, we make money off of it. Of course we do. We get paid for our work. But the driver for that absolutely was the idea that it doesn't always have to be an argument. It doesn't have, well, is this authentic? Is it not authentic?
Yeah.
Did it, again, man, that's wasted time to me. Go and have a good time, man. Go get our plugin, or the plugin from Sound City, or the plugin from whatever, and pretend like
Yeah.
you're back in 1962, and you're working with Aretha, and you're arguing with her alcoholic husband, and this is a part of like why we live here, man. It's like, just go have some fun with it.
Yep. Yeah, I think that every advancement in technology hasn't been so clear cut, and it seems that you and I both I've asked you several questions during this conversation, and almost every one of them you had two different perspectives to look at it from. Right? It wasn't this way or the other. I'm always curious, like, or I'll be honest, I'm anxious to see that when AI can make easy to understand explanations of audio topics,
Right.
what will poor Kyle do after that?
Oh,
What will Audio University do after that?
but human beings would never be that way. I mean, so much of our day-to-day life right now is argumentative. I mean, it's the even you're forgive this. You're doing a fine job of asking me all the right questions, but I don't take the bait sometimes, not you in particular, but I don't take the bait because I'm just being sincere and being honest. I know what it's like to have had a career in the music industry. I did it for a really, really long time. I get what that takes. Most of the people who are going to be commenting on it have not had that
Mm.
experience and are trying to live either vicariously or they have a point of view that's heavily guided by either their lack of experience or what they've read or what they've seen on YouTube. And that's all fine and fair because I don't deny anybody their right to have an opinion about anything. But I kind of know how it works. I kind of know what happened. And if I thought to myself that there was just one way to do anything, it wouldn't have lasted very long, you know?
Yeah.
It's not a matter of being a diplomat, it's a matter of understanding what the roadmap actually looks like. So,
And your appreciation for the road itself, not just the destination, like you mentioned earlier. You know, AI could probably give you that tool or that answer really quick,
quicker than I could.
quicker than you could. But there's something to be said about hearing your story about how it went, and there's something to be said about even if you could just have AI do it, then you're bypassing the best part
Well,
in a
there are
way.
places where I do have AI do things, and they
Hmm.
are money saving opportunities in businesses that I either own or am an equity shareholder in. And they're not generally a creative area because I definitely have my own misgivings about exactly that aspect of it. But yeah, man, it remains to be seen. It
So
remains to
much does.
be seen. It really does.
Yeah.
But I also think um, that we all have expectations. Yourself, myself, your listeners, we all have expectations that hopefully are well managed. And we can absorb the concept of this AI entity and how that can affect us, but it doesn't have to define us. It does not have to, nothing has to define you. Again, why I laugh a little bit about the arguments that people tend to have. I mean, is that really the flag you want to put at the top of the hill? Is that really like how it's fun to talk about this shit, but it's a bunch of shit, you know?
Yeah.
Go out and make me impressed by something you've created,
Hmm.
regardless of what the tools are, regardless of what the backstory is. Make me go, I want to sign you to my label. I want to invest my time, energy, efforts, and finance into what you've created. Impress me or impress anybody to that end. That to me is a worthy goal. Not me, but the worthy goal is like, just don't waste our fucking time, man. Pardon my language, but don't waste our fucking time. Come to the game with something remarkable. That's all I really care about, man. You know.
Yeah. It's
Uh,
amazing. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you like this. I hope to do it again. I want to open the door. Go ahead.
I said, if you'll have me, I'm happy to do it. I think you're excellent at what you do. So there's some kindness thrown your way. But no, this has been very, very easy and it's a lot of fun. I hope that your audience enjoys my perspective. And if they don't, they can throw things at me. That's fine.
I want to open the door for a moment. If you have a few more minutes to
Mhm.
some Q&A. This is live on YouTube. For those of you listening to the replay, we might just wrap it up here. So thank you for joining. But for those of you live with us, drop a comment with 3 question marks before so I can see. What do you want to ask Glenn? I think you've gotten a feel for what he is all about, how he thinks about things. Um, as I mentioned at the very beginning, he's done a lot of things in this industry. So now might be a good opportunity to talk to him. And while we're waiting for those questions to come in, Glenn, where can people learn more about you?
Um, that's a good question. I don't make a lot of effort in social media or in podcasts to kind of. So I guess you can go to my website, which is pretty archaic. Uh,
I put a QR code here with your website there if people are interested in checking out Glenn. If for nothing else, go put some context to this conversation. I'm usually guilty of not knowing the names behind. I think that's a part of being an audio engineer, first off, right? It's like you're not always the one that has the lion's share of the glory, particularly when you're working with artists such as those listed on your website. But there is certainly a lot of glory to be seen on Glenn's website, so go check that out.
Yeah.
It looks like we were
But
getting
we
some...
never live that on a day-to-day basis because it's always the next project, isn't it? You know, it's nice. It's nice to have success. It opens doors, that may have been previously closed. But I'm looking forward. No joke. I'm looking forward to whatever's next. Always.
Yeah.
Always.
It's do you find that that's a common perspective in our industry? Do you know, because I talking to you again, I feel you're unique in this way, that you're endlessly optimistic, it seems.
Well,
I love it.
well, that's kind, and maybe friends of mine would say, "Wow, that's such a crock of shit," because Glenn's
Oh,
not.
really? I don't know the real Glenn.
I don't know. I don't.
Yeah.
But most of the people that I would consider in the music industry who are real friends, not just acquaintances, I think we have a similar outlook. You know, I don't know that I was the same way when I was your age. You know what I mean? I think that that's a little bit of experience, um, and just kind of like I've seen a lot. I've seen it all. I've seen some pretty remarkably insane behavior, and don't really participate in that anymore. Certainly not for a very, very long period of time. So nothing that way looks unfamiliar. Sadly, looks unfamiliar. But yeah, I think I'm pretty optimistic. I can't believe I got to do it. It's hard for me to realize that. So, and I
Um,
think we have many questions.
well, I don't think we do. We have one, and it's not it really in your expertise, but I think there is a more general way to look at this question that is in your expertise, and it's what we've already talked about, kind of. It says, "How do you approach front of house engineers for shadowing and assisting?" Right. I think you haven't done much work in live sound, have you? You've done some, but
I
not.
did, but at the very, very, very beginning of my career, and it's light years technologically from what I did. So on the tech side, you know, nothing relevant, and how to get a job or whatever. But I think whatever the person who is asking the question is asking, probably from my perspective, is again more of a relational kind of thing and not a technical kind of a thing. When I look at a front of house engineer, live sound is a very Dionysic kind of, it's of the moment kind of thing, where records, maybe people would be more patient. If you came into a studio, that I was working in, and I had some familiarity of who you were, you'd know when was the right time to ask a question or not ask a question. If there's somebody doing front of house and you're at a venue and you're tapping on their shoulder, and the band is either doing a sound check or whatever, they're probably not going to want to be bothered. Um, I don't know that there is some kind of environment, whether it's online or live, where the equivalent of people like myself, but are in the live world. I guess my screen just went weird. That they might be available for Q&A. I was hoping to refocus this, but
Yeah, that is strange. You went all blurry on us,
yeah.
being censored.
Wow.
Um, I do want to put a video in there for this person posing the question, but also anybody who's interested. It's called the skills you need to succeed in audio, and none of them are technical, except maybe troubleshooting. But I think they get to what you've said. Pay attention, right? But and be ready to be of assistance.
Right.
But also walk into things not feeling like you have to have your hands in it to be valuable in the room, right?
Sure.
Like you're paying attention, especially in I think the early stages. It's actually a benefit to be like Glenn and say, well, it's actually good that you guys are slow because that'll give me the opportunity to get up to speed because I recognize that I'm not on your level already, right? Be humble, stay calm, these sorts of things in particular for live sound, but I think also for studio. So
I
yeah,
mean,
check out that
also,
video of it.
I would suggest, I didn't mean to interrupt, be adventurous. Really be adventurous. Step outside yourself. Make the connections where you might be nervous, to interact. And just, oh,
Did the sun? Oh no, the sun has gone out.
well, there's that,
Yeah.
about being adventurous. I see vitamins plus minerals. Very good. That's like some kind of chocolate syrup.
Yeah.
There's all,
That's actually a good question, though. Although I'm not sure, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts will be on this. Is what's your opinion on the general quality today of recordings coming out of home studios versus
so
the recordings
the,
coming out of professional
the
studios?
answer, which you're never gonna like, because nobody, I'm like just not taking a stand. It's much fucking better than anything that was ever recorded. No, not at all. Um, it really depends, doesn't it? Because there are records that I heard, a couple of the Beck records in particular, that I listened to, understanding where some of those songs on those records were recorded, and go, holy crap, I can never get that. I can never get that with all the same equipment, with all the same. There's just that's beyond me. So if I'm told that it was recorded at a home studio or it was recorded in a professional studio or whatever, then it's about it, it's about the artist. It's not necessarily about the technology. You know, um, Generally speaking, I think recordings today are more adventurous because, in the 70s, there was a sound for the drums. In the
Hmm.
80s, all the snare drums had to sound like guns, all the toms had to sound like cannons. There was a certain, we're talking about, rock and not necessarily urban music. I think that the variety is much, much wider in terms of what's acceptable. Sometimes what might have been considered a shitty drum sound has so much personality. It's awesome. So I look at um, the general quality today of music that actually moves me and moves you, right? Can't argue that, oh my gosh, it was recorded in a house, so it can't be as good as some. No, if the recordings, the performances, the songs move you, then it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. Wouldn't do it anywhere else. You
I
know.
love that answer. I think that is, you can look at different periods of time. I mean, even Fame Studios, Muscle Shoals, is that a anechoic chamber? No, it's not.
I mean,
It's actually, and
it
there
is
are
as
many studios throughout the decades that were not even like the ideal recording environment, quote unquote, right? But those are some of the most memorable
well. I'll also
tones.
share with you my favorite studios, other than my studio, which I just love because everything's set exactly the way I'd like it to be, are the most quirky rooms. The perfected rooms, which I've worked in plenty of those. I've worked all over the place in pretty much every recording studio that no longer exists. Um, if it was too perfected, it just sounded too anonymous to me. I worked and did a couple of albums. The studio, unfortunately, is no longer there, at a place called Compass Point Recorders. And let me turn this off. I'm sorry. And Compass Point was down in the Bahamas. And the the long story short is I don't do a lot of records, or didn't do a lot of records like AC/DC, but I was very fond of Back in Black, and particularly the drum sound. And I very much wanted to work in that room, in the A room at Compass Point, because I wanted to hear that sound. And it was a very odd shaped room. It was not perfected by any stretch. And I opened up the room mics, and immediately that tone was there. That sound was there. Didn't even matter that I had a different snare drum, different drummer, different kit. but it was immediately there. And that to me was exciting, man. It's like, oh, okay, we got that. The very generic, highly processed rooms, they're just not as much fun.
Yeah.
They're not really adding much to it. Fame was built at a time where there were the laws of physics and people who were scientists, but that was not applied other than a guessing game.
Hmm.
You know, when Rick Hall built those rooms, and we renovated one of the two. We renovated the B studio, but it was like carpet on the walls and egg crates and all kinds of like crazy shit. But it's hard to argue with what came out of there. You know?
My thought would be maybe there's a little bit of both. Like
Yeah.
this question reminded me of that. It says thoughts on investing in a home ISO booth, like Studio Bricks or Whisper Room. I think that, I mean, to answer your question specifically, I think an ISO booth solves some problems while creating some other problems. And this is the technical side of me coming out, right? In the one sense, you're reducing the amount of reflections off of the hard walls in your room, and in another sense, at the same time, you're making the early reflections much shorter because those ISO booths still
Mhm.
have reflections of their own.
Absolutely.
But if the question is a live room that sounds like a bedroom valuable? I think it is because of what you're saying, because it can take you back to a place in time. It can give you an energy of this was not highly perfected, and that there's an emotion that comes with that. I mean, there's a whole lo-fi
Right.
genre, right? But then I also think that having a place to record things in a acoustically treated room, having that space is probably valuable in some
Oh, I
instances,
would
right?
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, again, I'm not suggesting I prefer. Well, I am suggesting that I prefer
Yeah.
one over the other, but yeah, if I'm doing a string date, there are studios in every city. I haven't done string dates in every city on the planet, but there are studios that you would go to because you know that the decay is suitable. My favorite studio on the planet is Power Station A. I love that place. I just love that place. That room is perfection to me, but it's not a perfect room.
Hmm.
But it matches expectation. It does that thing. And you're absolutely right about do you want a room that adds to the signature sonically? Do you want it to be neutral? All of these things do a different kind of thing, and you have to go to different places. I mean, thoughts on investing in a home ISO booth like Studio Bricks or a Whisper Room? If you can afford to do it all, right?
Yeah.
If you can
Yeah.
afford to do it all. And make sure that your expectations are well managed by going to a studio before you invest in it, and work in a couple of those kinds of rooms, or ask a friend of yours if you can
Yeah.
set up a mic and an IO, in their basement where it's all cinder block, if that's what you're going for.
Yeah.
But
Determine if it's a tool you want in your tool belt.
exactly,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
because an ISO booth, even those portable ISO booths start at around 5K, somewhere in that range. I don't know because I've never purchased one, but I assume that they have to be in at least a $5,000 investment. And if you're talking about doing structural changes to your home studio or your professional studio, yeah, that's an investment. So, you know, hate to shift gears into finance advice, but yeah, man, try it all and see what you love. See what you love.
Yeah. I love it, Glenn. I think we're all. I speak on behalf of everybody watching that we're very thankful for your time
Oh,
today.
I'm thankful
Uh,
for you having me for sure. Absolutely.
so let's go ahead and wrap this up. But yeah, I just want to make sure that you know that we are thankful for you, and we definitely appreciate your perspective. And I think that I don't know how to feel after this. I feel like I can see things from different perspectives, and part of that scares me. Part of that makes me optimistic, and maybe that's the point, and maybe that's exactly where we want to be.
If I were you, I'd be very, very scared. That's
Good.
all.
Thank you for those closing words. Until next time, join us next time. I think Thursday will be the next podcast. We're going to have Jonathan Weiner. Leave a comment below letting us know what you learned today. And thank you.